Welcome back, everyone. We appreciate all of you who tuned in to our spring training series for the nozzle heads, and as promised, we're now kicking off our All-Star Plant Health series.
This will be a series talking about fungicide applications and BASF plant health. So stay tuned and thanks for joining us.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to our latest Nozzle Heads episode, where we're going to be focusing on fungicides and breaking down why we see the benefits of these fungicides and why they provide a benefit to your operation. So I think a great place to start is by focusing on diseases, because these are fungicide products and they have to control disease, right Jared?
Right, Mike, and we're not talking about bacterial or viral diseases, although those are ones we see in crops. Specifically with fungicides, we're talking about fungal diseases, and hence the name fungicide. So a real quick reminder on how diseases develop. We go right here to our disease triangle, right? We start off with one side being the host, of which we plant every year, corn or soybeans, so we already start with one side. The second will be the environment. And just like today, nice and humid and hot outside, like what diseases like, it makes me sweat, but it helps make diseases develop in the middle of summer. That's typically something we also see every year. So the third piece of the puzzle that we really need is the pathogen. Okay, and this is the physical disease that rolls in as a spore, either on the wind or through something that germinates off of the stover in the soil. Once you have all three of these in place for enough time, then we get a disease that can develop.
Yeah, Jared, and I think something important to keep in mind is that these components can show up not always in equal amounts, right? We've got a nice perfect triangle here, but it doesn't always work that way. We can have differences in the host, like different corn hybrids or different soybean varieties. We can have different levels of pathogen, or maybe different ways in which they infect the crop or arrive. Or you can have different environments. Some diseases prefer hot and humid environments, some diseases prefer hot and dry environments. And then finally, this time portion is also a component in the amount of time that it takes to infect. And because we can see different variability in that is also why we see variability in our disease levels, maybe in one area or from one area to another, or even from year to year. Now, this time portion is also something that's also very important, because it makes me think of the latent period as well, which is the amount of time between the initial disease infection and when we actually start to see symptoms show up. So Jared, could you explain why that latent period is so important?
It's important, Mike, because it can be a little bit misleading to me, because I've been out in a lot of fields and we walk out, like now, we can go out and see, hey, this corn all looks really clean. But we could have infection of disease going on. By the time that pathogen shows up, if that environment's there, there'll be a period of time after it infects the plant that it's growing underneath the leaf surface before it makes that spot or lesion or yellowish blur, right? Mm-hmm. So that's that period of time from the time of infection, the time we can physically see that disease show up on a leaf or stem, is called the latent period. And this varies from disease to disease. Some diseases like southern rust can turn around and have 3 to 7 days of a latent period, pretty short in the right environment. However, something like gray leaf spot's quite a bit longer, around 14 to 20 days. So this means that, once I start seeing diseases, they've probably been in my field for quite a bit longer than I think. And this also makes it more challenging if you're trying to take a preventative strategy, right? I think as we get down, we can scout for diseases, but really the best way to prevent yield loss from disease is to be preventative. Once that lesion shows up on a leaf, we can never make it go away. Unlike weeds, right? We see a weed, we can go spray it and take it away. We can maybe limit what kind of yield loss could have been there. Or in a human, if we get a rash, we can put some ointment on it and make it go away. But with plants, we don't get that luxury. Once that disease is there, it's really taking that green tissue that should be helping us make yield, and we can no longer make that go back green. So a preventative approach is really the most important way, and the latent period and differences in latent period between that also helps reinforce the value of needing to be preventative, because you don't really know you have a disease until it's a little bit too late.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that preventative versus curative also affects our timing, right? So we have our optimum timing to make sure that we're trying to get out there before the diseases show up, but it also influences our systemic versus non-systemic products, and that's also why we have these optimum timings, because fungicides, they are somewhat systemic in the plant. They move through the xylem, so they move where the water moves, which means towards the outsides of the leaves or towards those leaf tips, as long as you get contact on that leaf. But if those leaves aren't present at the time of application, you're not going to get movement up through that plant into that new growth. So that's why we want to make sure we're not getting out there too early, because we still have that yield driving tissue or leaves that are coming out the top that won't get protection if they weren't there at application.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about proper application timings for the best return on investment in some of our other videos, so go check those out to see when those best ROI timings are. But a lot of those are going to revolve around when the most amount of the leaf structure is protected, especially in corn. We see that return be the highest around that tassel timing because we're able to protect all that tissue. If you look at this field or these plots behind us, this corn's pretty small still. We can actually spray fungicide on this and do a really good job of protecting the leaves that are there, but everything that develops after that's still going to be susceptible to that later disease and sometimes needs a second application if you would choose to go this early. So all in all, preventative approach and keeping those things out really needs to be done not only before the disease gets there, but also at the right time to protect as much of that foliage as possible to maximize our yields.
Yep, and then finally there's a whole nother portion to this plant health conversation. Just like in humans, our health is not limited to whether we are sick or not, right? And plants are the same way. Just because they don't have disease doesn't mean that they're not healthy, because there are certain stresses out there, like environmental stresses, that can also negatively impact how that plant is growing and operating, and then eventually can impact our yield. So BASF plant health fungicides do have the unique benefit of being able to address those environmental stresses as well as along with that disease portion. So basically all of those stresses that the plant is going to endure throughout the season that could negatively impact that yield, we have the headline component in all of our fungicides that is going to physiologically help those plants endure that stress.
Yeah, and that's really where BASF stands apart when it comes to the fungicide game. I've been around BASF now for several years, and we've often been known as the fungicide company. Having that headline base for all of our products really has made us stand out because we've done a lot of work to show what that can do. We've actually got a plant health label on headline back when we launched it, and that was above and beyond disease control to show the stress tolerance that you get, the increased growth, and basically nitrogen assimilation and increased photosynthesis that all drives yield at the end of the day. If I can keep a plant less stressed, it's going to be more happy. And if you think about soybeans, less stress often retains more pods, which ends up with more yield. One example I like to talk about a lot though, Mike, is what makes us different. We can talk about all these other competitive fungicides out there. Not everything's the same, because when you have fungicides with headline in it, the BASF offers, we are able to do one thing of keeping those stomates open on the plant. Mm-hmm. And why that reminds me of today is I sit out here and sweat. It's really nice to keep my temperature down because I'm sweating. BASF fungicides with headline in there not only are doing some of these other things like photosynthesis, but one of the unique things that opens those windows or those stomates in the leaves and allows that plant to sweat. It keeps the temperature of the canopy a little bit cooler and allows that plant to stay alive a little bit longer. So as we get into some dry spells in the summertime, you'll often see plants with headline amp, Preaxor, Veltima, or Revitec, any of those brands, you'll see those stay open longer. You won't see them roll up in that shrivel of the heat day of the heat. You may see, as we get into later in the year, you'll see those leaves retain, or you'll see the greenness stay in there because we're keeping that plant healthier. All those things are very unique to headline, and as we look at competitive products, you actually see almost the opposite happen sometimes. They don't necessarily have the same plant health responses. They're only going out there to try and protect against disease, which is only part of the story.
Yep, so we really want to break up that stress cycle. Even in the absence of disease, we do have that stress, and so heat can cause stress, which can increase the temperature, which causes heat, which causes stress. It's kind of a cycle, and we can break up that cycle, and that's something that we really see drive consistency with our BASF plant health products. So yeah, Jared, if you want to round this out.
At the end of the day,
questions.
No, I think at the end of the day, Mike, we're so happy to talk about our fungicides because of the performance. It's something that I can hang my hat on because of the consistency in return and the bushels it can bring to your farm. And you should really consider what a fungicide can do for you because of the things that it does with BASF above and beyond a disease control. We're bringing you the best active ingredients on the market to not only control diseases, but to also provide the highest yields by providing the best plant health.